went rushing out to the airport, and I was trying to figure out, what the hell do I do now? Who's going to Dallas? I said, Delta Airlines has got to be going to Dallas. They fly to Dallas. So we went to the Idlewild Airport terminal, and I went running in, had the guy wait, and the guy said, the whole airport is paralyzed. We're not taking off. The government is shut down, all transportation. But he said, I understand that a flight is leaving, a special flight is going from American Airlines. So I ran back, went to American Airlines, and indeed they were preparing an airplane which was supposed to go to California, and they just told all the early passengers, you're not going. The FBI and the Secret Service taking this plane, and it's using it. Sorry, you have to wait till the airport opens. So I managed to get on that airplane, loaded very quickly with FBI and Secret Service people and as many news people as could possibly get on. And then it took off without waiting for anybody. And I remember Bob Considine being on it, and I think Jimmy Breslin and a few other big-time New York correspondents, and little old me with my tape recorder. A very dramatic flight. And I want to get to the main part of this, but I won't tell you about the flight. But we were told about the portions of the story that we did not know. By the time I got on the airplane, I knew the president was dead. I was handed also, by the way, this piece of copy and a bunch of UPI and AT copies. And it is the bulletin, Merriman Smith's bulletin, which I still have preserved. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally of Texas have been cut down by assassins' bullets. They were shot as they toured downtown Dallas in an open car, et cetera, et cetera. He dictated that from the top of his head. And by the time I got to the newsroom, this was given to me and a stack of other copy and the tape recorder, and off I went. And all the way down in the airplane, we could hear, as an airplane flew over a city of large enough size, the pilot would pick out of the air the radio reports and pipe them into our cabin. So we knew about Lee Harvey Oswald. We knew about Tippit. We knew all of the Mexican border was closed. We knew about the tension in the country. And by the time we landed in Dallas at Love Field at 8 o'clock that evening, after flying to Washington from New York to pick up other Secret Service people and FBI agents, stopped there and then went straight down to Dallas. We got off at about 8 o'clock, and we were pretty much ready and briefed to cover the story. I went right to the police station and began covering the story, waiting for Oswald to come out. I was there when they held the rifle up, and I was amazed that they were out there showing this rifle to everybody. And in New York City, they would never do that. It's a piece of evidence. They would be looking at it and protecting it. And here, walking down the hall, was a detective holding this thing up in the air, and that astounded me. And we expected Oswald to come out at various times. And I recall filing several stories and then hearing a lot of the reporters say, not so much the Dallas reporters, but the out-of-town reporters and also the foreign reporters who were there from New York City and from Washington, who had arrived with us and had gotten here somehow, starting to talk already about a conspiracy and also about the possibility that the police were beating Oswald because they had noticed this cut that he got in the black eye at the Texas Theater. And they were pressuring the police to bring Oswald out. We want to see him. If you're not beating him, why don't you show him to us? And I guess they decided at about midnight to bring him down because that's exactly what they did. And my theory is that they brought him out simply to prove that he was not being maltreated behind closed doors. And into the lineup room I went, covered the story. Of course, the deal was that we were not going to ask any questions. Oh, no questions. Bring him down. We only want to look at him. And Captain Fritz agreed to that, and Jesse Curry did too. No questions. Of course, as soon as he hit the door, everybody asked the question. The rules went out the window. Oh, here he is, the most notorious prisoner in American history, and right in front of us. I'm going to ask this guy a question. And I screamed at him like everybody else, did you shoot the president? And he didn't answer. He came in. And how did you get hurt? And other questions that were around the periphery. And then everybody said, let's ask the same question. Did you shoot the president? And then he said, no, that's what I'm accused of. I didn't shoot anybody. And then the rules were broken. They whisked him away. When the dust cleared, Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, was doing an interview talking to reporters. Now, I was desperate for a telephone. Could not find all of the guys in the know, all the local reporters knew exactly where to go. And I was just out of luck. And I ran out into a room outside of the lineup room, and there I saw some telephones. And I'm dialing New York, and I said, I've got to get Henry Wade on here. I'm going to do an interview with him after this. I'm going to get a fix on the story. Stand by to record. And I'm yelling and looking around frantically like that, and up comes this little guy in a blue suit, much like this one, pinstripe suit, with a gray fedora. And he says, what's the matter? I said, I'm looking for Henry Wade. He said, what are you, a reporter? I said, yeah. He said, where are you from? New York. I said, are you a cop? Because I thought he was a vice cop. I said, oh, here's a detective. He's got an office. I'm going to use his phone. I got to humor this guy. So he says, no, my name is Jack Ruby. I run the Carousel Club. I said, well, that's amazing. I said, Jack Ruby, the Carousel, what is it? He said, here, come on. He gives me his card. And he says, get some of your guys down after this is over with, and come on down and have a beer. We have a lot of girls there, you know. Take care of you. And I said, so I played along. And I said, okay, I got your card. Right here. Put it right here, right? Okay. Now, I got to have Henry Wade over here. Can you go get him? I got to watch the phone. He said, just a minute. He said, no, do you want Henry Wade? I didn't ask him. He said, do you want Henry Wade? Hold on. He goes running over to Henry Wade, taps him. He says, Henry, the guy from New York. And Henry looks over and he says, tell him I'll be right over there. Astoundingly, Jack Ruby arranges an interview with me, with Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County. Now I'm saying, this guy is really wired. And Ruby disappears. And Henry Wade walks over, and I do the interview. And I'm absolutely flabbergasted by all this, but nevertheless, I continue. I did a great job on the interview. Everybody's congratulating me. Personal interview with Henry Wade, blah. I go to KLIF because we had an arrangement with them. My office in the meantime had told me that we're going to get you a place to work. We need a lot of stuff in the morning. So I'm working away at KLIF, and in comes somebody. I'm studying, and I'm concentrating on my copy and on my tape recording, and I'm trying to pick out a thing, and I see somebody walk in front of me, and the next thing I know, when the engineer is telling me, do you want a sandwich? Do you want some coffee? I said, oh, did you order out? He said, no, Jack Ruby just brought over some sandwiches. That was, by the way, the sandwiches that Gary was referring to. We finally got them around 2 o'clock in the morning after he did not find Gary down at the police station. He said, I think I'll bring him to KLIF. So it was a great sandwich, I'll tell you. And I said, Jack Ruby. I said, there's that weird guy again. And I made him as a buff, as a police buff, I'm going to hustle this up, as a guy who did hang around firehouses and so forth for the excitement. So I wrote him off. The next time I saw Ruby, and here's the climax, was that morning. And I'll get to it very quickly. I decided, because I knew it was going to be 10 o'clock in the morning, I went over there about 9:15, and I practiced running down the steps of the police headquarters from the third floor to the basement, because my idea was to interview Oswald as he came out of the detective's office, because everybody was set in the basement, and me and my New York quickness, I suppose. I was going to be a sharp guy, get a big scoop and interview him upstairs. And I was with Jerry O'Leary, who had the same idea of the Washington Star. Jeremiah O'Leary has practiced running up and down with me. And in case we missed him. And out comes Oswald at the appointed hour. It was well after 10 o'clock. I guess it was around 11:15, 11:20. And I went forward with my microphone. And I said, do you have anything to say? And I got pushed against the wall, and he threw Oswald into the elevator, and down he went. And my heart went with it, because I said, I'll never work again in the news business. How stupid could I be? Here's this prisoner leaving the basement. I'm not going to get a description of it. How do I explain this to my boss that I wasn't there? Flew down the steps and was glad that I did, because I practiced it. I knew what the pitfalls were, and nobody stopped me. I was amazed, because there wasn't a cop on the steps saying, excuse me, where are you running to? Into the basement, and I looked around because I expected everybody to be dissolved and leaving and taking notes after Oswald had left. No, he's still being signed out. And I went, I said, I was greatly relieved. I had to find a place in this great crowd to describe this, and I squeezed into this, next to the bumper of the car in which he was to go to the other jail. And I'm squeezing in and squeezing, and went big elbows out, and I said, God, I got a great shot here, quote unquote. And Oswald starts to come toward us, and I did not know it, but I stood and squeezed in right in front of Jack Ruby, who was waiting to shoot him. And here comes Oswald. Everything is very fast. Split seconds. Oswald's coming toward me. I went forward with my microphone, and again I said, do you have anything to say in your defense? Now, just as I'm saying that, I hear 2 or 3 footsteps, and this black flash in front of me, and I heard a bang and a flash against Oswald's sweater, his blue sweater. I could see the flash. And I looked down, I said, I've been shot. I said to myself, I've been shot. I got too close to this one. And too close. And I realized I wasn't shot. But here is Oswald collapsing, moaning, being dragged in, a big fight in front of me. And I said to myself as a reporter, and I hope you students in the future listen to this one, you'll come upon a time when you will be met with a story like this, perhaps, where you have a choice of shutting up, freezing, and doing nothing, or talking, or writing, or taking a note, and being cool. I had that choice. I said to myself, if you never say anything ever again into a microphone, you have to say it now. This is history. You will be judged on these words. You know, you're almost your entire existence. All this is going through my mind in split seconds. And I said the only thing that I could say, which is what I witnessed in front of me, Oswald has been shot. A shot rang out. There's a struggle. Now, how's that for brilliant reporting, huh? Wow. Perceptive reporting. Oswald has been shot. How did he get that idea? And I described the fight. I really didn't know what I was saying into the microphone. But I remember going down on one knee because I saw policemen with their guns out. And I don't know whether he was a Texas Ranger or somebody was yelling at me to stop or to freeze. I forget his words. And if you've ever tried to talk into a microphone like this, you know, you're going like, I'm frozen, you know, I can't do anything. But I keep on broadcasting, and guys had their weapons out, spread eagle, and they were looking around. And I felt at that time as if there was a backfire, and there was one before we saw Oswald, or if a gun had gone off accidentally, there would have been a crossfire. There would have been a terribly tense crossfire, and I was right in the middle of it. Okay, and I'm going to wrap it up right now. So I went down, and I kept on broadcasting. And I guess I did a fairly good job because it has received several awards. It's part of the permanent collection of the Broadcasting Museum and is on permanent display, the Museum of Broadcasting in New York. And I'm proud to say that it is also my notes and so forth are on display here on the 6th floor. And a fairly good job of reporting for a young guy who was under a lot of stress. Let me just wrap it up by saying 2 things. A couple of corrections for history's sake. You heard on the tape, holy mackerel, right? I did say those words, and I'm not proud of those words as a reporter, you know, and a guy who's supposed to be great with words under stress. Holy mackerel, is that a great thing to say? I did say that, I admit it, I'm not proud of it, but I said it way after that event. I was running, my tape recorder was still going, I did not know it was going, and I was simply, as I was running up the steps of the police station to try to get a telephone, I was trying to assess what had happened. This enormous story, one little guy with a tape recorder, how am I ever going to dig out of this big hole? And I just said, holy mackerel, unbelievable. I was saying that to myself, an editor in New York, in the days before we had editorial integrity, editing integrity, I should say, where you have to leave history alone, took that phrase, oh, that's a great phrase, let's put it up in front, right after he was shot, and therefore has changed broadcasting history. I did not say it at that point. The last thing was, I ate the sandwiches, 10 o'clock, okay, I think I covered it all. I do have a couple of other things, but they're peripheral, and I thank you. That's my story.
Very good, Ike. Thank you, Ike.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming all the way from New York to attend this thing. Bob Porter and I, Bob was on the Times Herald, I was on the news, but we were contemporaries and very friendly rivals. Bob worked in the amusement section at the Herald. I was in the amusements department at the news. And he knew Jack and had a couple of incidents with him. Would you tell them to us, please?
Yeah, really kind of briefly, and it's like sort of the next verse is the same song in the sense that Jack was known to almost all of us because he was always hanging around. And as Wes said about the news, you could come to the Times Herald, push a button, come up to the 4th floor, and walk in, and Jack would do that. He'd be, you know, 2 or 3 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, 17 hours, 18 hours, 19 hours, 20 hours, 21 hours, 22 hours, 23 hours, 24 hours, 25 hours, 26 hours, 27 hours, 28 hours, 29 hours, 30 hours, 31 hours, 32 hours, 33 hours, 34 hours, 35 hours, 36 hours, 37 hours, 38 hours, 39 hours, 40 hours, 41 hours, 42 hours, 43 hours, 44 hours, 45 hours, 46 hours, 47 hours, 48 hours, 49 hours, 50 hours, 51 hours, 52 hours, 53 hours, 54 hours, 55 hours, 56 hours, 57 hours, 58 hours, giving his passes to his club, slapping us on the back one day. The next day he'd come storming in because maybe we'd run a picture of Tony Bennett on our, what we called amusement pages in those days. And we never ran any pictures of his entertainers who were strippers and third-rate comics, you know. He was that kind of a character. The personal involvement was that afternoon we were still busy in our department putting out our Sunday entertainment section when the motorcade came down Main Street, which was 2 blocks over from the Times Herald building. We were on the 4th floor. Somebody said, oh, there goes the motorcade. We all dashed over to the windows, could see through an opening there by one main place. The motorcade go by, not even sure, say, which vehicle was carrying the president, and sat back down at their desk, and then just moments later, the call came in that something had happened. And so as Charles Damerman, who was one of our editors in those days, I think, talked about this morning, how we were the afternoon newspaper. We still had editions working, so we were really kind of immediately everyone thrown into this process, even the people back in amusements. And it was a big weekend in terms of there was opera performances. There was a symphony that was performing. Theaters were going on. It occurred to one of the editors, and I think it probably was Charlie who came back and said, let's check out and see what is the city going to shut down, what's going to happen. So I began as a movie and theater critic, checking primarily with the theaters. And somewhere in this process, which I would guess would be maybe an hour after the assassination, one of the phone lights was blinking. I hit the button and picked it up, and it was Jack Ruby, and he was returning a call to Don Safran, who was our nightclub columnist. I looked over at Don, and Don was on the telephone. I said, well, Don's on the phone, Jack. And he said, well, do you know what he was calling about? And I said, explain what we were doing, thinking the survey. And he said, well, what are the nightclub people doing? I said, well, I'd only heard about a couple of them. The ones I heard about said they were going to shut down for the weekend. And he said, well, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, hell, I don't know, Jack. It's your club. That's your decision. And there was kind of a pause. And he said, well, they said they were going to shut down. And I said, that's what they told me. He said, well, I guess I better shut down too. And I said, okay, I got 2 columns here, closed, open. I want to put you in the closed column. And he said, yeah, very sort of indifferently. And that was the last of the conversation. I didn't think much of it at the time, of course, because I was talking to a lot of other people. We were checking around also with the personalities. I remember the actress Joan Crawford was in the city. I got her on the telephone for her comments, et cetera, et cetera. So it was quite a shock. Then 2 days later, when Jack shot Oswald, but then on reflection, not inconsistent with his personality either. He was all over the spectrum, as his trips to our office illustrated. And so I just thought there was a little incident maybe that kind of helped put his personality profile maybe into a little sharper focus.
Thank you. I forgot all about Joan Crawford being here that day because I went down to the Statler Hotel and interviewed her. And that night, a fellow by name, I think, is Bob Clary. He was the little Frenchman that appeared in Hogan's Heroes. He was opening that night at the Statler, so I went down there. And just before showtime, Joan Crawford walked in with Richard Nixon. They were having a Pepsi-Cola board of directors meeting. She was on the board of Pepsi-Cola, and he was the attorney for Pepsi-Cola. So they came to the show. And I'll never forget, this was the day before. This was Thursday night. And Clary introduced her, gave her a very nice introduction. And then when he got to Nixon, he said, and also in the audience is a man, I didn't vote for him. And it was really embarrassing. Whether you liked Nixon or you didn't like Nixon, it was just a terrible way to make an introduction, very unprofessional. And he gave him this left-handed introduction, and Nixon stood up and grinned through his teeth and sat down. And he left early the next morning, and I wrote in my column that I thought it was a very unprofessional introduction. Our final panelist, you've seen him on, all I can say is he knows more about this thing than any man on the planet. The most respected newsman out of this whole thing. And if he tells you something, you can go to the bank on it because it's true. Hugh Ainsworth.
Thank you, Tony. I'll be very brief. I just have a couple of stories. Most of you that knew Jack knew him on a different Jack Ruby than I knew. I did not like Jack Ruby, and I'll tell you very briefly why. Besides the Sovereign Club and the Carousel, he had a club out in Oak Lawn, an after-hours club. And often I would find myself, I was single most of the early 60s, and I'd find myself out there because in those days it was the brown bag days. You had to buy a bottle, take it in, drink it all or whatever. And out there they served only near beer. So you go out there, you didn't have to, have the bottle with you. Well, every once in a while somebody would sneak a bottle in there. And I saw Jack one night, and he used to come out there after his club closed a lot. His sister Eva actually ran it. And I saw him this drunk, and he was obviously drunk. They took his money, his cover charge, and he had a rather tight suit on anyway, and I saw something sticking out there. I figured it was a bottle. And they took his money, brought him in, and Jack Ruby pushed him up against the wall and took a billy stick and broke that bottle in his pocket. That was the first time that I saw Jack do something rather... He was a bully. He was a show-off. He was a bully. I got to know the family. I never liked Jack, but I did get to respect the family who, my God, went through. You can only imagine what the family went through. And Eva was sort of a strange lady, but the others, the brothers and sisters, I got to know them pretty well. January of '67, I had just joined Newsweek magazine, and the next day, Jack Ruby died. So I ran like the devil when I heard about it to the hospital. And as I'm running up to the hospital, here comes Eva, Brother Earl, and the other sister from Chicago, I forget her name. And they said, come on and go with us. I'd gotten to know them during the trial. And I said, where are you going? They said, to the funeral home. So I went to the funeral home with the three, the brothers and sisters, and helped them plan the funeral because they were just distraught. They didn't know what his birthday was. They didn't know what kind of veteran benefits he had. They didn't know how to ship the body back and forth. And so there I was. I went out on Live Oak to the funeral home and helped them essentially plan the funeral, made a couple of phone calls and everything else. And it was really an interesting thing. There were several really angry reporters and photographers that had followed them, and they wouldn't let them in. And I remember that's probably when I made my first enemies, because they would say, Ainsworth's in there, why can't I get in there? And they would claw on the windows and the doors. And I remember Shelley Katz particularly, but he does that all the time, okay? But anyway, as a result of this, the family invited me to be the only newsman inside the closed funeral in Chicago. And of course, I just joined Newsweek, as I said, the day before he died, so Newsweek was very, very glad to have me do that. So I went up there, and they had the House of Shiva, and we went to the family's house, of course, and it was a sad occasion. There were bomb threats, there were all kinds of strange things that went on. But I already knew and already had felt in those days preceding, in the 2 years, 3 years preceding that there were conspiracy people out there that were making up stories that would do anything to get a story. And I figured if indeed Jack Ruby is buried without someone looking at him, that they're going to dig him up someday. They're going to put pressure and say that's not really Jack Ruby who's died. Already I figured they'd do it to Oswald. That didn't happen until a long time later. But anyway, so I talked to the family that day. I talked to Earl particularly and Eva, and I said, you've got to let someone in the press, just before you close that casket, examine that body. Well, they kicked it around for an hour or two, and they didn't really want to do it, but they did. Finally, 2 Chicago newsmen and a CBS newsman, I think Nelson Benton, were allowed in at the very last, right before they closed the funeral. So maybe we won't have somebody coming from Europe and insisting it's not Jack Ruby. I might tell you one other story that was told to me by a guy named Bob Larkin, who was a sort of a bouncer for the competitor Abe down the street. Later ran a nightclub here in town. Tony knows him, I'm sure. One time as a bouncer for Abe, he got in a fight with a guy, and the guy stabbed him. And down at the bottom on the street, there's Commerce Street. And Bob's telling me this happened maybe 61 or so. And he said he's laying there bleeding. The guy ran off. Nobody else there. He's all on the street. He's bleeding, and he's hollering. And here comes Jack Ruby waltzing out of his club. And he said, what happened? What happened? He said, the guy stabbed me, Bob said. He said, well, get up. And he kept kicking Larkin. Ruby was a strange man, but that's about all I have.
I'm going to tell you one final story that'll wrap this up. Earl Ruby and I became very friendly. Earl was his brother and put up the money for the trial and everything. And after it was all over, in fact, just a few years ago, he told me, he said the day before Jack died, Earl and his attorney, a fellow by the name of Adelson, went into his hospital room, and Earl was carrying a briefcase, which was really a tape recorder. So when they went in, Adelson kept the guard occupied, talking to the guard. And Earl said he went over to the bed where Jack was, and he said, told him in Yiddish. He said, this is not a tape recorder. This is not a briefcase. This is a tape recorder. If you have anything to say, he said, we both know you're a dying man. He said, now is the time to say it. He said, please, Jack, anything. And Jack said, if I hadn't made a U-turn on Main Street that morning, none of this would have happened. As you remember, there was a parking lot across from the telegraph office, the Western Union. And there wasn't much traffic on Main Street that Sunday morning. So instead of going up Main Street a couple of more blocks, taking another one-way street north, another one-way street west, and then a one-way street south to get into the parking lot, he just made a quick U-turn and went into the parking lot and saved about 4 minutes, and that was the difference.
Okay, we call this final panel. We call this final panel our sidebars of the day, and we're going to be talking about some of the things that probably never made the papers or never made radio or television, and probably have not been told except when there have been a few times when some of us have gotten together and under the influence of a little John Barleycorn or something, they really come out. But today we're bearing all, as they say, and we will be on our way. We've got several questions here, and if any of you have a question you'd like to write it out and bring it up here, and bring it up here right here, and we'll see if we can't get it answered. And I had one lady ask me a while ago, and some of you guys would know, whatever happened to Connolly's hat that he was riding in the wearing in the limo? She says it's disappeared. Does anybody know? Well, it takes care of that. What happened to the hat Raymond Buck gave the president? That's probably somewhere in the Kennedy Library, I would guess. Come up to the mic if you hear, Bo, and tell us.
I know that the suit that he was wearing that day is in the archives. The reason I know that is that I asked him later if he still had a copy of the story that I had handed him about our Chronicle poll. He said yes. He said when Kennedy asked me about it, he said I had it in my coat pocket. I didn't show it to him. I said, is it still in your coat pocket? He said, I don't know. The suit's in the state archives. We called the state archives and asked them about that. They said that suit was sent twice to Washington for examination, and that story would not be there. We're now checking with the Conley, the archives at the LBJ Library. They have about 50 boxes. If people are interested in that sort of thing, they have about 50 boxes of the Conley papers. And they said, we haven't cataloged all those yet, so we don't know. We might find your story there.
Okay, thank you very much, Bo. I'm just going to quickly run through a couple of these questions, and then we're going to talk about some of the more bizarre things in the coverage of this story. What happened to the minister who reported DISD students in his church were cheering about the assassination? Actually, he was talking about University Park School over here in the Highland Park system. Someone told me recently, I think he now has a church up in Washington, D.C., that's right. And here's another one. At least 2 reporters have mentioned seeing Tippett's casket or possibly Tippett's body at Parkland. I understood Tippett was DOA at Methodist. Could someone clarify this? Who would like to take that on? Come up here, Jerry, to the mic. You qualify to get, this is Jerry Hill, who had a career with Channel 5 and then with the Times-Herald and Channel 4, that's right, and also with the Dallas PD. And Jerry had an awful lot to do with an awful lot of things. So straighten us out on that.
He was taken to Methodist Central, which is on Colorado, by Dudley Hughes Ambulance. But when they wanted a post-mortem for legal purposes, the medical examiner was at Parkland. So they transferred the body over there for the post-mortem. That's how the body got to Parkland.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Why is there no copy of the full-page ad announcing JFK on display here? Frankly, we didn't have one. We certainly were not trying to suppress it, but our archivist, is that the term? Our archivist just didn't have a copy of it. What happened to Tippett's widow and the $600,000 that the American public contributed to her? Jerry, you might be in a position, I guess, as much as anyone else to respond to that. And what was the amount of money that Miss Tippett got? Mike, you follow that.
No, the last I heard was the 600,000.
About 600,000.
It was about 600,000. What happened was that she asked some specific police officers. Glenn King, who was later chief of police, was one of them. V.K. Hipskin, who was another. They counted all the money. They were the ones that made the deposit. They counseled her on getting an investment counselor. Trust funds were set up for her and the kids. She later married another police officer who has since died, and she is a widow and is still fairly active, I understand, in the Police Officers' Wives organization.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, again.
Excuse me, Eddie, I think I can answer why one of that ad's not up here.
What?
Oh,
Why, who's
the
not
other
up here?
question about the ad is a letter
Yeah, go ahead.
in the Dallas News. I don't believe there's much coordinated effort. I'm not faulting Darren Painter or anybody. It's up to the media.
We were not
bring
trying
displays
to.
up here.
No, we were not trying to get displays. We actually want to thank our historian Ferris Rookstool, who supplied us with most of these, and he is the one that is responsible for bringing the things that we have, and we do appreciate that very much, Ferris. A couple other questions. With all the hours Oswald spent being interrogated, why was there apparently no record, no tape, written or otherwise, of the responses from the most notorious criminal suspects of the century? Okay, and I know several of you want to get on that. Mike, you want to try?
I wasn't involved with that part of it.
Oh, okay.
No, I really wasn't.
All right, Wes, come on up here to the mic and tell us about what you know about that.
In the oral histories that Bob Porter and I are doing for the Dallas County Historical Foundation, Henry Wade made the statement that there was no tape recorder in the police station, nor was there any at the Dallas County headquarters. You got to remember, tape recording was just coming in and was just getting popular at that time, and to have that kind of equipment at that time was fairly far advanced. Now that was just Henry's statement.
Okay, thank you. I'd always heard this story, and I know Tim Timmons was in the audience earlier today, who was the assistant USDA at the time, and Bob Gemberling from the FBI was here, and I'd always heard the story that Captain Fritz just kind of took charge of that interrogation, and he just didn't want any help from anybody, and he asked the questions, and that's probably about as close to being right as you can be. And the captain ran his own ship, and it was not a federal offense. Isn't that correct? At the time, it was a state case, and it was handled by the Dallas Police Department. Oh, okay. Come on up, Jim.
The investigation of the president's murder was a state offense. It was not covered by federal statute at that time. Now, I understand that the law, the Congress had written laws protecting all the other government officials, but for some reason the president was omitted. Tim Timmons, is that correct? Okay. So it was a state offense. The FBI was simply assisting the Dallas Police Department in the investigation. That's all it could do. It did not cover federal jurisdiction.
Okay, now here's one I don't really understand, but maybe together we can figure this out, all right? I have really enjoyed hearing these journalists recalling that weekend. For the most part, it sounds as if a good job was done. That being the case, how did the ball get dropped so badly so shortly thereafter? I don't understand the question, so we can't answer that. Something that I've always wondered about, Mike Cochran, you were over at the cellar, were you not?
No,
Friday night?
I was with the Secret Service and the White House staff and all that crew Thursday night before the assassination.
Well, that's what, yeah.
They went to, everybody was at the press club. And the reason for that was, back then, of course, there was no place in town to get a mixed drink. We didn't have liquor by the drink back in the Stone Age. And so everybody came to the press club, and about 3 o'clock, I think some of the Secret Service agents and some other folks just headed to the cellar. And I know that I think they had a Senate inquiry into the cellar and the Secret Service sometime after that. But no, I didn't. I had to be up the next morning, so I didn't get to go to the cellar.
Okay. I'm going to ask something personal now. This is kind of an inside thing, and unless you know Huffaker and Wise and all of this group of mine back from those days, you won't really appreciate this, but you'll bear with me. Bob was down in the basement that morning, and he and Nelson Benton, the late Nelson Benton, were kind of taking turns, just sort of waiting things out until they brought Oswald down. And so when they brought him down, it turned out that Bob had the mic, and I was back in the newsroom. We were all watching this, and so Bob starts screaming into that mic, "Lee Harold has been shot. Lee Harold has been shot." And I'm kicking the wastebasket and saying, "His name ain't Harold." and Huffaker has got a can tell us why he called him Lee Harold, and he's going to hang it on somebody we all know.
They're going to put that on my epitaph. My Andy Warhol 15 minutes, and I got the guy's name wrong.
Don't take 15 minutes to tell this, please.
What happened was when Nelson and Dan Rather and I were sort of rotating around City Hall and trading off with the CBS live television mic, one of us would stand by the mic, and New York would call for us on just a couple of minutes' notice, and we would have to give a summary of how everything stood at that time. And also, we would be among those pushy television reporters who would crowd up to Chief Curry and the other officials who passed through the hallways up there. And Dan spent most of his time elsewhere in town, but Nelson and I would circulate around the police station and try to verify items of information and do that sort of thing. And during one of those times on the Saturday before Oswald was shot on Sunday, I thought, well, I had gone, by the way. I'd been at Parkland Hospital the previous evening, and my assignment at the police station didn't begin until that Saturday morning. And so I had a full set of notes that I had already received from Warren Fulks, who had been our reporter there the previous night. And on that set of notes, it had all the correct information. It had Lee Harvey Oswald, age 24, ex-Marine, and all of those items that I needed to know to go ahead and continue the reporting. And I thought, well, nobody's really gone in and checked the public information officer yet. So during a time when Nelson had the mic, while I left and went down to Glenn King's office. He was the police public information officer at the time. And Glenn King, wherever you are, I'm going to blame you for this. But I sat down across the desk from Glenn, and I began to go through my notes and just double-check every piece of information I had, because I was always very thorough. Later became a college professor, you can understand. So I went over every item of information. Lee Harvey Oswald, I read him, and he said, no, it's Lee Harold Oswald. And I said, well, now, everybody has been, since yesterday, everybody's been saying Lee Harvey Oswald. Are you certain that this is Lee Harold Oswald? And He said, absolutely, it's Lee Harold Oswald. I said, well, now, Glenn, where did you get that information? He said, I got it off the arrest record. So I thought, okay, and I marked it out. I still have my notes where I marked out Lee Harvey and wrote in Lee Harold. And from that moment on, I thought I was the only guy who was right. I have ruined myself for history.
Okay, right. Thank you, Bob. Here's something for Jack Tinsley. Jack, someone wants to know, how did you manage to get in the school book depository building after the drive over from Fort Worth, since it was closed off immediately after the assassination? Making his way now to the mic is Mr. Tinsley, who moved a little faster when he came.
Well, the answer is I don't know. But I got in. I hitchhiked from Parkland Hospital downtown. I got in, and the foreman took me up to the 6th floor. I don't know what time it was. You know, I wasn't keeping track of time, but I did get in. It was not closed off. And
Okay.
I was there.
Okay. You remember that this really was the second visit of JFK to Dallas during his presidency. And the first visit, and a lot of us in this room covered that, he came to say a deathbed goodbye to Sam Rayburn. And I remember we were all out at Baylor Hospital, and I was out there. I've been out there a good bit over the last month, since 2 of our daughters had presented us with new grandchildren in that time. And the other day when I was out there and thinking about coming to this meeting today, and I remembered back, and sure enough, the president was out there, but he was in and out of town, and nothing like this took place.
He went to Mr. Sam's funeral in Bonham, Texas, and pictures in adorned the press club of him. And can I add a comment contributing to what was asked about why the ball was dropped? That is presuming and assuming that this conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera. I agree with Mary Elizabeth Wood this morning, but that's my personal opinion. I don't know.
Okay.
But keep in mind, early in the 60s, print media was dominant, and television and electronic is dominant now. But I want to correct something about Secret Service men didn't attend me and Bill Winter to the, our memory gets a little fuzzy about it, but a rookie cop tried to pull a gun on me. But I made 2 whiskey runs, and that was mentioned, and I didn't find any whiskey for Baskin. I found Coca-Colas up Harry Hines Boulevard. And Paul Croom didn't touch a pint of whiskey that Kruger sent me over to the old Dallas Hotel to get him a pint, and I carried it in and set it on the desk, and he said, thanks, Tom. Some of this anti-Dallas business...
Sam, or Tom, we really would like to, I don't want to cut you short, but we do want to kind of keep this thing moving along. Here's a question. Who were the pallbearers for Oswald's funeral? Will the pallbearers present please stand? 1, 2, 3, 4. I thought we had 5. Jerry is ill? Okay. Who would like to tell the story on that? Mike, why don't you? Oh, you want to tell it, or you want Mike to tell it?
I'm going to let Mike tell it.
Okay.
I do want to say one thing about it. Of course, the big issue on that day was whether or not Oswald's body was actually in the coffin, and the police chief finally, he didn't want to be fooled either, and he went to check it. But when it came time to taking the casket down, the biggest issue was who's going to carry it down. There weren't any family members, whatever. And so I finally ended up on one of the corners, and the thing that scared the living daylights out of me was 2 things. One, that sucker was heavy. I had never lifted a casket in my life. I didn't realize they were heavy, particularly with bodies in there. And number 2, I represented the Dallas Morning News, a very conservative newspaper, and here I was carrying the assassin down to a gravesite. Thank God somebody said, this is making history, and since I also had to shoot photographs, I popped off, and the fellow that's a Bolton guy replaced me on the casket, and I got these fellows carrying it down to the gravesite.
Well, now, I've heard this story, in Mac, you and Cochran are going to have to get me straight on this. One of you started out to be a pallbearer, and the other one said, well, if the AP's there, I got to be there too, or if the UPI is there, I got to be there too. What's the story?
Just the opposite. They were recruiting. Well, number one, everybody's got to understand that Oswald's popularity that day was at an all-time low. So there weren't a bunch of people running up to volunteer, and so when they tried to get somebody to do it, well, two things. It became obvious that if we were going to write a story about the burial of Lee Harvey Oswald, we're going to have to bury him ourselves. So then but what they did was I don't remember who it was that asked me to do it, and I said no. And I turned around, and there was Preston McGraw at UPI jumping right up there. And I said, if UPI is going to do it, I've got to do it. So Preston, who spent a career kicking my ass, I wasn't going to let him do it on the coffin.
Well, my name's John McConnell. I work with Star Telegram Field. And I worked for them then. I know how memories change. I knew Grudy Miller, the guy that brought the body out there. I was a night police reporter, and Grudy walked over to me and he said, John, will you help me unload the body? And there was absolutely, Mike is right, the only people there was the Oswald family and the preachers. And so then Grudy said, do you think the newsmen will be pallbearers? And I said, well, I'm sure they will. And Cochran was right, too, and as a result, Oswald had one too many pallbearers. He normally had 8, and he had 9 around the casket. One other thing that I remember
Who was the ninth one, John?
I do not remember. I know there was
one of them a Secret Service agent? I've heard that.
Well, I don't know.
One of them was an agent.
Anyway, I know he had one too many.
Okay.
Well, see, there's...
All right, we have a dispute here that may never be settled.
Somebody will write a book about it, I assure you.
Either there were 7 or there were 9.
The other thing that I remember about all this was there was a reporter there from a paper I will not name, and he immediately, after the casket got there, started saying that there was not a body in there, there was a sack of potatoes in there. And that was the conspiracy theory had already started, that they were burying potatoes instead of Oswald. And one other quick thing about my part in it, when we got back to the Star Telegram, we had approximately 6 people out there, and one of our reporters was a guy who spoke Russian, and he had interviewed Marina. And so Chief Craig, who y'all met this morning, that huge man, he's about 6'5", and I have never seen Chief mad but one time. Anyway, he came over to me. My nickname is Bunky. And he said, Bunky, I want you to get the notes from the rest of the reporters, and you write the story. So I started around, and all the reporters agreed except Dan, this other reporter, Dan Bates, I'll give his name. And he said, since he worked the afternoon paper, he was going to write an exclusive about his interview with Marina. So Dan was quite a big fellow himself, and I learned early on in life that the bigger they are, the harder they fall, is not necessarily true. The bigger they are, the harder they knock hell out of you. So I went over and told Chief Craig that everybody would give me their notes with Dan Bates. And Chief Craig went over and he said, Dan, I want you to give Bunky your notes. And Dan said, I'm writing this exclusively for the Evening Star Telegram. And Chief's nose started getting red, and he reached down and grabbed Dan by the shoulder, and he said, you son of a bitch, you're going to give Bunky your notes. And Dan said, yes, sir, I'm typing them right now. And finally, the kicker on it, it was a terrible interview because he had asked her such things. Was she really from Russia? And what kind of country was Russia?
We have... Okay, here's another question from that vast audience out there. Incidentally, if you have any more questions, get them up here and we'll try and answer them. You can see how fully we answer these questions. Please fully explain the dry chicken bones mentioned earlier. I'll take a little bit of a hand at that, and if anybody else want to join in, do what? Okay, come on up, Hill, and see if your story varies from mine, all right? There were these three guys in the fifth floor window, James Jarman, Bonnie Ray Williams, and Harold Norman, and they had lunch down there. And are you going to dispute me?
Nope.
Okay.
We had 2 sets of chicken bones in the school book depository. When we went into the building to search it, and we got there before Captain Fritz did, so we did police procedure. There was an officer named Roy Westfall. There were 2 deputy sheriffs. One of them name was Mooney. I do not remember the other one's name. Myself and a uniform officer. We went to the top floor, which was the 7th floor. We checked the roof. We came back to the 7th floor. We searched it. We left the uniform officer on the 7th floor so that anybody in the building could not double back on us and get behind us in an area we had already cleared. We went down to the 6th floor, and at that point, Mooney found the barricade that would have sealed off the window from the view of the rest of the 6th floor. We found the boxes that he had used for an armrest, and on top of this barricade type thing was a paper sack with some chicken bones in it. Now, we found these on the 6th floor. I went down to the street to get the crime lab. At that point is when we met Fritz at the front door. I explained to him what we found. He went in the building. I went out to report to the senior officer's location. We stopped our investigation when we found the spot where the shots were fired from, and later on the same floor, on the 6th floor, where the rifle was found. The people talking about getting in the building later, when we got all the physical evidence out of there, we got the fingerprints, we got the hulls, we got the rifle, then we had no more use for the school book depository because we couldn't take it to court.
Okay, but you say the bones, you found them on the 6th. I thought they were on the 5th.
We went to the 5th. There could have well been some down there, which
Well,
I
that's-
understand there were.
Yeah, that's because that's where
I'm not disputing the fact they were on the 5th floor also, but these were not, didn't play a big part in it other than that was the first thing he thought he could take a picture of, as he said this morning.
Okay, Tom Dillard mentioned the flatbed truck having been removed from the front of the motorcade at the last minute. Does anyone know why the change was made? Also, was the parade route changed at the last minute? Nope. Okay. We can't hear you. Sure. Try one.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not positive that we were actually going to have a flatbed truck. It was the custom. We expected it, and we were told that we would have one prior to our trip to Love Field. Now, of course, I don't know who stopped it. Someone mentioned Lyndon Johnson stopped it. I don't know. Does anyone know?
It was what the cameraman should write up. Tom, who was, you were in a convertible, as I remember. Were you in that convertible with, who was in there? Jim Underwood? Which one was he in?
Jim Underwood was with me and Bob Jackson. Bob, do you remember who else was there? Crouch? Crouch? I think so. And then, of course, the driver. Whoever the driver was, we don't know. People have told me, the FBI and whatnot in the interview said that we were the 6th car in the parade, number 6. Is that what you've heard, Bob?
Bob, get up to the mic, if you would. Thanks.
I think we were in the 8th car
8th.
from the very lead car.
Yeah.
We might have been 6 back from the president, but there was a police car, and then there was,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know, I think we were the 8th
I've heard
car
we were
from the
6th
front.
from the president.
Right, that's probably right.
We could very well have been 2 miles. It made no difference.
That's right.
Okay, Oswald's mother claims her being a single mother and absent. I didn't realize that term was, single parent was used 30 years ago. I thought that was fairly new. Oswald's mother claims her being a single mother in absence of a father for Oswald. for the way Oswald turned out. What can you tell us about Oswald's brother, Robert? I never knew Robert, but I saw him on the front line the other night, and he looked like a pretty normal, sensible sort of guy. There's not much doubt in his mind that... Jerry, come tell us that.
Go ahead.
Mike Neal, come on. Or Cochran, yeah, you'd know that. Go ahead.
Lee was raised by his mother. I don't think Bob was. He was off to military school or boarding school or something like that. I had a couple of encounters with Marguerite Oswald. And if you ever had an encounter with Marguerite Oswald, you might better understand Lee's psychology. She was something else. Within a couple of weeks of her son having been accused of committing the assassination of the president and himself being killed, we went over to do a TV and word interview. Jack Klinge, TV guy from UPI Movietone News. And she put the hustle on us from the time we hit the front door. Her first reaction was, well, those lights, I can't, electricity, I can hardly pay the bill. And $20 bill to help pay her electric bill got us inside. And then she was talking about no food in the house. And the cameraman got in his car and went down to 7-Eleven and bought a sack of groceries. And that got us an interview with Marguerite Oswald. Again, something that I don't think... It's quite normal for a mother who had just lost a son under those circumstances.
You know,
and then years later, a year or so later, with the release of the Warren Commission report, and it was released to the media in Washington about 48 hours ahead of release to the general public, and they put a copy of the report on a plane to me here in Dallas and wanted a picture of some of the participants or some of the people involved in the thing, and we chose Marguerite, and there was a young reporter whose name I don't remember with the Fort Worth Press at that time who was kind of handling her business for her and called him, and well, she posed with a picture of the book, and he called me back later on and said she'll do it for $25. And $25.
You know,
and I've still got a photocopy of the receipt that I made her give me, received at UPI $25 for posting for the book.
Well, I'll tell you, anybody who ever had any dealings with Marguerite Oswald would amen that she heard a little different drummer.
She went to a little different drummer, but Bob and all that I remember, and Mike, you may know more about this. He was not raised by Marguerite. He was separated.
That's right. I really never knew Robert. I met him, but I never really knew him. But the Secret Service agent Mike Howard, who was the one with Charlie Kunkel who guarded the Oswald family after from the Sunday right before Oswald was shot until the following Friday. They said that Robert Oswald was just a nice guy, very supportive, and but totally estranged from Marguerite.
He sure came across that way as in the frontline thing.
They could not say enough nice things about him, yeah. But I don't really know him.
I had one here. Can anyone present address the time factor involved from when Oswald shot JFK from the 6th floor and when he was spotted in the downstairs break room on the 2nd floor drinking a Coke?
That's in the Warren Commission report. I don't remember the time lag.
That was Baker, I think, wasn't it?
Hey, do you know what caused the fist fight between Gordon Yoder and Jimmy Breslin at the press club?
I didn't know there was a fight between Gordon Yoder
Yeah,
and
they
Jimmy
did. I went up there on Saturday night, and they said, you missed the show Friday night. Said Yoder punched Breslin, big New York columnist.
Okay, here's a question. Will a videotape of the conference be available? I thought you'd never ask. If so, what will be the cost? You shouldn't have asked. And who can you order from? We are taping this. SMU is taping the whole thing. C-SPAN is, of course, taping it, and I understand we may get a schedule from C-SPAN before we leave today as to when they'll be playing it back. And do you want to, why don't you, if you will, Darwin,
Yeah.
Explain about
the videotape. Of course, it's being done today, and we intend, as soon as possible, to start editing that into a 1-hour tape, perhaps an hour and a half. It seems so good. And if you're interested in that, stay in touch with the Center for Communication Arts, SMU. That's Center for Communication Arts. Telephone number is 768-3028.
That's your number.
That's my number. I can't remember the number for us. What is it, Laura Lovett?
Here, darling.
768-3090. I know that's right.
And also...
And also the photographs.
And also, are you not planning on doing the verbatim proceedings?
Perhaps. Perhaps a verbatim proceedings. We'll see how it looks and try to put it together into a pamphlet form. Sound tape, you're the second person who's asked about that. We hadn't thought about it to start with, but it looks like there's a market out there for a sound tape.
We just may
and finally,
sell tapes all we didn't know existed. Right?
Finally, the photograph, the group photo that was taken by Ferris Rickstuhl will be available as well from the Center for Communication Arts, SMU 768-3090. And we'll talk to Ferris about reproducing those photos. But that can be ordered as well, and I have no idea what would be the appropriate price here.
Okay, and next question. How quickly was the Zapruder film released to the press? Did Zapruder make the film available? Did he present it to the government, etc.? But I want to say that there's a lady here, Bobby, and sorry, Bobby, I don't remember your last... There she is back there. And I was on a talk show the other night promoting this bit, and she called in, and she was a lady out at Kodak who processed that film that day. We're delighted, Bobby, that you're with us today. She told me that I think I'm right on this story. See if I remember things correctly. That the FBI brought that film in, so they want it run then, shut down the plant and do it. Plant manager said, I can't do that until I call Rochester. He called Rochester, and they did the film. They shut it down. Who would like to talk about the Zapruder film?
Well, Harry McCormick came up, edited the Dallas News, and said that he could buy it for something like 10 or 12 grand. And,
right, but he
and
didn't
said
get
no.
it. So let's talk to people who were actually negotiating for it, and I think you were. And come on, Tom, why don't you...
That was before it was developed when Harry came up,
and I think Darwin Payne also was involved in that too. Go ahead.
I took Harry out there that night as they were processing the film. I was trying to get Zapruder to allow me to make a copy of one of his frames for us to run in the morning paper, showing the car with the people in it. At the same time, I think I had, as I remember, I may be wrong, I think I had permission to offer about $50, as I remember. This could be wrong, to Mr. Zapruder for the permission. But I know my pitch was that if you let me have this, and we put it in the Dallas News, this one picture will be great publicity for your film, which should bring you more profit for it, which seemed to be a pretty good pitch. But Harry's profit, God rest his crazy soul, was to get control of it so he could be cut in on the profit, which Harry immediately foresaw as a rather large amount, as it turned out.
The bidding, I think, I heard the story got up to from I think some people were offering as much as $1,500, $1,700 for that. And what was the final price that Time Life paid? I heard $250,000. Is that pretty much what? Okay. Why doesn't someone talk about Jack Kruger, editor of the Dallas Morning News, on the grand jury, and the judge wouldn't excuse him? Whoever wrote that question probably wasn't here this morning, because we went into great detail on that.
Well, he came in mad as hell, and he...
On the first panel. Okay, Bill Payette was head of UPI. His wife Jenny was called from the bridge table to go to Parkland.
Right.
She held the phone until Merriman Smith arrived. Well, I didn't know that. Okay, let's see. Where do we go from here? We have some... how did Eddie Barker get the TV interview with Marina Oswald? Connections.
Eddie,
Okay.
did it have anything to do with Heineken beer?
Heineken, with who?
Heineken.
With Marina?
Didn't you buy Marina Oswald some Heineken
No,
beer?
no.
Is that another conspiracy
Kahlua.
rumor? Okay.
Well, this is the isn't this the day to confess? Okay, how many witnesses were present at the theater when Lee Harvey was arrested? And why has so few of them ever been interviewed? Well, I think they've all been interviewed. I know MacDonald was interviewed. Jerry, this man was everywhere. He was on the magic carpet that day. Get around to the mic.
One of the main reasons that some of the witnesses at the theater were never interviewed were that they were hooky shooters. When we went in the front door, they went out the back. The second thing was there were 7 officers actually in on the arrest. And that included McDonald, C.T. Walker, Ray Hawkins, Tommy Hudson, Bob Carroll, K.E. Lyons, Paul Bentley, and myself. In addition to that, there were several other officers inside the theater and outside the theater, but there were very, very few patrons in the theater at that time of the afternoon anyway. And as far as I know, at one time or another, probably all of the policemen have been talked to, and probably all of the customers who weren't hooky shooters had been talked to.
You're talking about the kids upstairs in the balcony?
Yeah.
Should have been in class. Okay, would you comment on the relationship between local reporters and the national reporters? I think we've been commenting on that all day. As it relates to the coverage of the events of the assassination, I think we've pretty well covered that. I would like to hear more information. I would like to have more information on the tone that was set in Dallas prior to the president's visit. Details, please. Well, again, I think we pretty well covered that. We had I'll tell you a story. Wes, come up. Here's the guy who, he will not be remembered for his great days as the moderator on Swap and Shop, that great garbage sale to the air we used to do, or the fact that he was mayor of Dallas, but he will be remembered because he took the film of that lady with that stick hitting Adlai Stevenson over the head. And why don't you, and there's also sort of a follow-up to that you might want to get into.
Well, Jim Underwood and I were at the theater, the Memorial Auditorium Theater, where the UN Day was being observed. And by the way, I don't know whether anybody remembers this or not. Jim would remember it if he were here today, but if he were still alive. But there's a riser on that stage that was up about that far. The riser had not been lowered completely. And after the voices of the National Indignation Society and the other demonstrators with their banners and so forth really got ugly, for some reason, don't ask me why, that riser went boom and fell down level with the thing, and I thought Adlai Stevenson's eyes were going to pop right out. It scared the devil out of him, and it scared Jim Underwood and me, too. Anyway, it got to be about 9:40, and Jim and I were conversing back and forth, and we said, look, we can't leave now. It's too electric in here. Something could happen. By that time, all of the other television reporters had left. I think there was one still photographer from UPI or somewhere. I think was still there. Was it you, Jerry? Yeah. Well, all the TV reporters had gone, and Jim had the weather to do at 10:15, and I had the sports to do at 10:22, and so I got the job of staying on because my sportscast was 7 minutes later than his weathercast. So I followed Stevenson out the door, and they were roping out behind some ropes. The people there were Valium and, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Murray Sheets were standing there, and Adlai Stevenson, who was then ambassador to the UN, went over to speak to them, and this lady came from behind and struck him rather hard over the ear, as you could see in those films here and down at the 8th floor, that's the 6th floor exhibit. I've always suspected that my news director put Walter Cronkite up to it, but he put the film on that night on his 6 o'clock news, ran it back twice, and said, I want to thank that young, alert cameraman in Dallas, Texas, Wes Wise, for that great film. Remember that? Did you put him up to that?
I do indeed.
After that, I think this is
trying to
very...
help you along, Wes.
Beg your pardon?
Just trying to help you along.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that really helped. I got a $50 check to CBS for that. Later on, and this is pretty important because the Secret Service and the FBI were blamed for, along with the Dallas police, for the lack of preparation. I went over that Adlai Stevenson film frame by frame with our friends of the Secret Service and the FBI, and I think part of our ulterior motive was to get on their good side. But we looked at and examined very closely the people in the background of the Adlai Stevenson film for fear that they might be present at the trademark. And as a consequence, I was not only assigned to the trademark to cover it by Eddie, but also assigned by the Secret Service and the FBI if I saw any of these characters that we observed in the frames of the Adlai Stevenson film, then I was to notify or to stop one of the Secret Service men or the FBI. So if you hear that the FBI and the Secret Service weren't doing a lot of work in preparation, that's not quite so, because we went over that thing 3 or 4 days, as I recall it, and trying to pick out people that might be suspicious.
You know, you got started again in something that we used to back in those days, and today we'd all be drummed out of the Corps because we thought that the police were pretty nice people, and they thought we were pretty nice people, and we used to do a lot of back scratching then, and it helped us along the way, and we think that, or I think that we helped them along the way. But as I say, in today's society or in today's media, that would be a no-no, and we'd probably be out there selling shoes somewhere. Okay, next question was Oswald walking toward Jack Ruby's apartment? It always comes up. At 12th and Marsalis, when he shot Officer Tippett in the corner block of the East 10th. He's right out there in that area. Who wants to take that on? I've been out there and seen that, and sure enough, he's kind of right.
Where the house is in North Texas, where Jack Ruby's apartment was, about he was walking the straight wall from the city toward Jack Ruby's apartment. Tippett stopped him, I believe, in the corner block of East 10. Got him. He started walking on toward Jack Ruby's apartment. Tried to go for the steeple, it's not check the speed.
Okay, thank you, Warren. That's Warren Harding. That is not the former President Warren Harding, but the former State Treasurer Warren Harding. Thank you very much, Warren. I appreciate that. But no doubt about it, was out there in the same neighborhood. Do you think the country is finally, quote, forgiven, unquote, Dallas? I've had a couple, we kicked this around a while, but I've got 2 theories as to what really, well, 3 theories, I guess, and see if you agree with me. One is, one of the things that really helped Dallas as much as anything else were the Dallas Cowboys. The second thing was the TV show, Dallas, and I swear I can't remember what the third thing was. What? Okay, oh, the cheerleaders, that's right. Anybody, Bob, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to say, and Wes Wise being mayor for 7 years.
Oh, yes, that's, okay. Who put, you know, there are a couple of people that I did want to get to before we get too far down the road. One was John De La Garza. John, are you here? Yeah, come up to Mike. It's kind of an interesting story here. John was a student then. You can see that he has not aged as much as the rest of us. And all. Oh, that's right. He was a bit younger. He was a mere child. And John was a student down at the University of Texas in Austin, and he was on the Daily Texan down there. And a bunch of those enterprising types got on an airplane, chartered a plane, came up here to cover it, right?
Yeah, back then we thought, as probably the folks from the Texan staff do now, that we were the best daily in Austin. Probably still are. Thank you. Although we published only 5 days a week, and I guess that's the same. We didn't publish on Saturday or Monday. But what happened was Most of us heard it one way or the other on Friday afternoon, right after lunch, and most of us went straight to the journalism building, the old J School, which is now the geography building, where my son studied last. And we huddled around the AP wire. Dave McNeely was the editor. Managing editor was Richard Cole, who's now the dean of the J School at UNC Chapel Hill. News editor was Charmaine Marsh, who was supposed to be here and do this today, but she used to be on Jim Wright's staff and now works in Washington. And a bunch of us huddled. I was a very junior staffer then, and Dave decided we needed to publish an extra on Saturday, but to do that, we needed to get people to Dallas. So Charmaine, the news editor, Richard Cole, managing editor, and Jim Seymour, an extraordinarily talented photographer and a very large man at the time, got in a little, fairly small single-engine aircraft. I think the Longhorn Flying Club chartered from them and came on up here. 3 of us drove. They did their thing a lot earlier than we did, wherever they could at Parkland and the school book depository. We hit up here somewhere around 6 that evening, finally, in a car, 5:30 or 6, rendezvoused with them, and then spent the rest of the evening in the City Hall on the 3rd floor, and an incredible atmosphere, as everybody has talked about. The streets were eerily quiet. I remember, I think, was that the old Copper, that little diner across the street? Copper? Now a parking garage. We ate there that night.
Everything in downtown Dallas, John, is a parking garage.
Thank you, or a parking lot.
Ooh, I better watch how I say that.
But we did our thing. Jim Seymour kept running out of film, and the word spread that there was a college team there. He never lacked for film. Once that was understood, everybody was our friend. Everybody liked the fact that there was a college team there, and we really didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we thought we did. My goal as the most junior member of the staff, or my job, and as the Catholic in the crowd, was to find the priest who had given the president the last rites. So I hit a payphone someplace out on the street and just started calling, and finally tracked down the Reverend Oscar Huber, who was then, he's now dead, who was the pastor at Holy Trinity Church. 6 years later, that became my parish church and remains so. So it's kind of strange how life goes on.
Thank you very much, John, for sharing that with us. Speaking of, someone asked earlier about that ad, Thank You, Mr. President. And John Weeks, who was one of the editorial writers at the Times Herald at the time, and I were talking earlier, and he said, it's kind of an interesting headline they had on that ad, because they stole it from you, right, John?
Well, you've heard about 2 statements. Welcome, Mr. President. The one back here was in the Star-Telegram, and of course the headline of the scurrilous ad in the Dallas News. Well, there was a third one. On Thursday evening, the day before the President's arrival, our lead editorial in the Herald says, "Welcome, Mr. President." And it was a sincere editorial by A.C. Green. At the time of the assassination, A.C. Green and I were on the editorial page staff. Actually, we weren't just on the editorial page staff. Hell, we were the editorial page staff. As has been pointed out earlier, overstaffing was never a fault of the Dallas Times Herald. But at any rate, this editorial ran the evening before, and there are a couple of lines at the end I might quickly read to you. The next to the last paragraph, which I now wish had been the last paragraph, says, "The eyes of the world also follow the President of the United States, at home or abroad. The eyes of the world are following him to Dallas." We should have quit there.
Quit while you're ahead.
Right. But the last line says, unfortunately, "We believe both the world and John F. Kennedy will like what is seen here."
Ooh. Okay, John, thanks for sharing that with us. We're going to wrap this up here in a minute, because it's going to be supper time somewhere before too long. But here's a question that I was discussing with someone over here during one of the breaks, and we might talk about this for a minute. If the assassination was a state crime, why was the autopsy done by, and I don't know that your wording here is correct, a non-pathologist in Washington, D.C., or why wasn't there an autopsy here? That's a very interesting story, and there are several of you that can get into that. Who wants to take it on?
it was really Dr. Rose, was it, who was the county medical examiner here? Is that it, Charles Rose? Earl Rose, right. And he tried to do an autopsy here, and the president's entourage said, we're getting him out of here, and they moved very quickly and did not permit the autopsy to be performed. I was looking the other day at the arrest record, and I should have brought it. I thought I had it in my briefcase, and I've lost my briefcase, so that takes care of that. But, you know, there's a mistake on the arrest, on the police report of Kennedy's death, the Dallas PD report. It has his wrong age on there. You know that? Typographical error. He was 46 when he died, and it said 47. Well, I guess that we ought to wrap this up. You've been a most delightful group, and all of us have enjoyed being with you. And now Darwin has a couple of closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Well, we've been waiting for the results of that poll. I've been anxiously walking to the back of the room, and we don't have it. Maybe you'll read about it in the paper if we don't hear it here, but our Gary Schultz had the information, was compiling it. We'll have it later, after you've gone. There is much more to say, of course, but this has been a wonderful start, I think, and I'm deeply appreciative to all the journalists who've come today. I think it's been a great event. Did I hear somebody calling my name? No. We have a number of guests who are here, some of whom have been mentioned, but let me mention some others and remind me if I miss any. Officer Jim Lavelle is here. Officer Lavelle is the homicide detective. You know who he was. You might stand, Jim. There he is at the back, who, of course, was handcuffed to Oswald at the time he was shot. Bob Kimberling, who was an FBI agent who compiled the FBI report on Oswald. Where are you, Bob? Glad to have you. Tim Timmons, who is Assistant U.S. District Attorney. There's Tim. Greetings, Tim. We've heard from Sergeant Gerald Hill, who was here, Bobby Hicks, who processed that film, Warren G. Harding, County Treasurer and State Treasurer. Did I miss anyone? I'm sure I've missed everyone who is here is special. And Gimberling, we introduced him, yeah. Now, I've got a letter, a note from an anonymous person. I'd like to read it, I think in tribute to all you journalists who came today. You chose a career to cover the news. This fateful day in November has now made you historians. For those of us born in the 60s and 70s, you have made a tragic day in history become real. Your presence here has rekindled old friendships and brought back old stories, but also you have captured and put into words the scene of the events that surrounded those history-making days. Thank you for taking the time to pass on history. I thought that was an awfully nice note. Now, this has been a very exciting weekend for us, and an enjoyable one, but we cannot forget that it was a tragedy that was the genesis for this weekend. And also, we remember that many of our good friends, our journalist friends who covered this story with us, are no longer here. You've heard their names mentioned throughout the day. Could we ask you to pause and reflect for just a few moments in memory of those journalists and also of our president? Thank you. I'd like to mention a few other people, if you'll indulge me. This whole thing began with a conversation between Jim Ewell and Alex Burton. Alex hasn't come to the microphone today, a rare occasion for Alex, but Alex, thank you. Stand up. We started meeting here at SMU to plan that event, and we composed a committee, a Reporters Remember committee, which consisted of Jim and Alex, myself, Hugh Ainsworth, Eddie Barker, Bob Porter, Gary Schultz, and Tony Zoppi. I think that was all the members of the committee, so we appreciate all their work. Thanks also to our videotape crew, led by Lynn Smith, assisted by Wendy Adams. Thanks to Ralph Miller of SMU, Lynn Gartley of SMU's TV radio sequence, John Gartley, Director of Communication Arts. Thanks especially to Susan Tadaro, Jeff Moraz of SMU's Catering Service, and a very big thanks to the Dallas County Historical Foundation for a wonderful party which we had last night at the 6th floor. It was just terrific. It was an out-of-body experience to be up there on the ground floor and then moving up to the 6th floor with all the journalists who had worked on this story. It was really a never-to-be-forgotten event. Thanks to WFAA TV for a contribution to this program. Ferris Rootstool, who brought us all the memorabilia you see out here in the cabinet, who also took the picture. And you can order that picture from the Center for Communication Arts at SMU. We'll give you the details later. Thanks to Professor Laura Lovett and her SMU student volunteers, including the Society of Professional Journalists here at SMU, Peggy Montgomery and Barbara Scribner as well. Anything else? Any other comments, closing? The results. We got the results. Partial. This is for... No. Is this for the audience? For the parents? Well, these partial only from notes that were taken. Somebody better go check on old Gary. We're worried about his health. I don't know. This is partial. I think this is from the audience. Do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in assassinating President Kennedy? 75 yes, 6 no. And that's about, do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate the president? Somehow these figures don't match. 9 yes, 72 no, so there's something wrong. If you answered yes to number 2, who was involved? Mafia, gee. I had 32 Mafia, 14 Cuba, 42 U.S. intelligence agencies, 5 Dallas police. So I think we can disregard those numbers. They don't seem to reflect anything, to tell you the truth. The information office was going to put out a news release on the results of that poll, so I guess we can read about it there. That's all I have, and thanks again to all of you very much. It's been a wonderful day for us, and we appreciate your coming.